This is Michael Popok, and this is Legal AF After Dark. E Jean Carroll, heroine, victor, courageous plaintiff, wins again against Donald Trump, and justice is served by a 9-person jury in the Southern District of New York. What happens next with the $83.5 million judgment? What happened with her $5.2 million judgment against Donald Trump from May? What will the Trump side do next in terms of trying to lower the amount as the E Jean Carroll side tries to raise the amount of the judgment in front of the judge as we then move towards an appeal and the need to post a giant bond by Donald Trump? Confused? Want to know more? Tune in to Legal AF and we break it all down. Here's a clip.
Talk about what happened in the E Jean Carroll defamation case, because rarely do you see somebody on trial that in a criminal case continues to commit the crime while they are on trial, or in a civil case, which the E Jean Carroll case was a civil case for monetary damages. Do you see a person who's on trial for defamation continuing to defame and continuing to behave in the way that they were accused of, right? Most defendants, even when they did the underlying act, try to at least pretend that they didn't do that or they don't act like that, and they're not going to keep on giving evidence to the person that's suing them or give evidence to the prosecution. But this was such a unique situation where during the trial, Trump would be posting defamatory statements about E Jean Carroll. E Jean Carroll's lawyer, Roberta Kaplan, would then be showing it to the judge and saying, I want to admit this into evidence. And then it would be admitted into evidence. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he just did it again. When? Just now, moments ago, you witnessed the defamatory statements live in real time in this court. So no doubt that was a major aspect of the jury's verdict. And E Jean Carroll's lawyer, Roberta Kaplan, and Sean Crowley made that very clear in their closing arguments as well, that that's what was going on, and that's why you needed to send a message. Here are my takeaways, Popok, and then I want to throw it to you. Number one, the entire defense by Donald Trump through Alina Habba was horrifying, was sickening, was disgusting. Alina Habba went there during the opening statements and closing arguments and argued E Jean Carroll should be happy. This is what she wanted. Donald Trump gave her what she wanted: fame and attention. So really, Donald Trump is the victim here, which is the routine that these MAGAs do on their right-wing networks. But that's a horrific argument. That's like a horrific thing in a court of law to say. It's horrific to say anywhere. But she tried to bring that MAGA Trump cult stuff into a court, and it didn't play, and say the victim of a rape should be happy because her rapist gave her fame and keeps giving her fame by defaming her. And E Jean Carroll's lawyers said what I just said to the jury. How horrifying. Can you believe that that's what they are actually arguing to you today? That's what they're arguing. Two, Trump's behavior in the courtroom, storming out, speaking under his breath, showing contempt for the jury, walking out before the jury walks out, just acting like a complete maniac in the courtroom. Three, Alina Habba was just the worst lawyer ever from every aspect of it. She was not likable and she was incompetent. She couldn't do basic things like introduce evidence. She doesn't know what admissible evidence even is. She doesn't know how to lay a foundation. She couldn't perform the most basic functions of being a lawyer. Four, as I mentioned, evidence created during the trial. Five, the judge controlling the courtroom and showing a roadmap for how you control your courtroom. When Donald Trump tried to speak out loud, Judge Kaplan would yell at him and say, "Be quiet, Mr. Trump. This is my courtroom. Understand what I'm saying. Be quiet right now." And Donald Trump would listen. And he would put Donald Trump in his place over and over again and would not let this become a circus-like environment. And finally, number six, E Jean Carroll, her courage and the competency and just exceptional nature of her lawyers, Roberta Kaplan and Sean Crowley, who were A-plus lawyers and delivered just an incredible opening and closing. How much money is it going to take to make him stop? And you're going to have to decide that, because he needs to stop this behavior. Those are my takeaways. Popok, let me throw it to you.
Well, yeah, I agree with everything that all the five things that you just said. You've got a judge, you got a collision here between a federal judge with empowered and with all of the endowed with all the powers of a federal judge, who knew who his enemy was in the sense of a defendant that was going to act out, was going to be contemptuous or contumacious, was going to be disrespectful to the process, to the system, to the administration of justice, to the jury, and everybody else. Knowing that, because of what happened, we all had a dress rehearsal back in April and May, a similar but not identical trial, but about liability, about whether E Jean Carroll was raped by Donald Trump, and a jury of 9 people in May found that she was. And the only issue for this jury, which seemed to be a concept lost on Alina Habba and on Donald Trump, was not about liability, was not about anything other than how big of a check for punitive damages would be written. And when you walk into a courtroom and you're the defendant in a case where the jury needs to determine if they are going to throw the book at you and award punitive damages, having already been instructed day one, including during jury selection, that by the judge, that this is a case about the amount of punitive damages, if any, that you are going to award. You are to assume that Donald Trump sexually assaulted E Jean Carroll, and that he defamed her in the 2019 period when he was president and thereafter. And you are to take all of that into account, including his intent to harm her, with prejudice against her, with animus against her. Those are the factors that the jury had at its disposal from the moment they walked into a courtroom. And you and I have talked a lot about, on Legal AF over the last 3.5 to 4 years, our faith in the jury system. And we saw it play out here. I know that Robbie Kaplan, the lawyer for E Jean Carroll, is now on network television. Hopefully we'll get her back on the podcast again. It's also declaring her faith in the jury system. They sent a message to bullies everywhere that they will be held accountable. And if you try to do, this is now the second example of this with Rudy Giuliani a couple of months ago, also acting out in front of a jury, doing things inappropriately in real time that was brought to the jury's attention, continuing to defame the people for which he was on trial for same thing, defamation damages, punitive damages included, and the same result. He got a $148 million hit from a DC jury. This one, right, by the way, right on the money, not just what we predicted, but right on the money of where a jury needs to be in order to have its jury verdict upheld ultimately through a trial and an appellate process I'll talk about in a minute. That $65 million in punitive damages against the $28 million in actual damages, if you will, is so perfectly calculated to survive an appeal. I know all these nutty MAGA people are up on social media saying she'll never see 1 cent. You're right. She's not going to see 1 cent. She's going to see whatever the total is for $83 million worth of cents. And that is going to get paid. That the process now that people should understand as we manage expectations or set expectations is that judgment will become final in about 30 days. Sure, Alina Habba is going to file a motion for remittiture or vacatur, which means to have the judge take away from the jury and lower the number or eliminate the jury verdict. He's never, Lewis Kaplan, the judge, having watched Donald Trump act inappropriately and teeter on the edge of contempt and mistrial for most of this case or all of this case, is not lowering the number. He also has the power to raise the number, by the way. So Alina Habba, when she asks for less, look for Robbie Kaplan to ask for a bit more and see what Judge Kaplan does in terms of it. Now, I don't think he takes it away from the jury. I think he's going to affirm and confirm the jury award. Once he does that, that judgment becomes final, and they can go enforce that judgment and show up with a sheriff at bank accounts, which we know where they exist because the Barbara Jones Monitor has, we know where all the bank accounts are, unless they file an appellate bond to take another appeal like they did in the first case for the 5.2 million. But this time it's not just coming up with cash, which is chump change. And I mean literally chump change because he's taking it off the chumps that support him. That Donald Trump never pays for his own, doesn't pay for his own bills and legal bills or bond posting. But that was 5.2 million plus interest, plus another 10%. This is more. This is 83 million. So he's either going to have to get and go through the monitor to get it, ultimately, supply proper financial statements, oh, what a tangled web we weave, to a bonding company and try to get a 10% bond and only have to put up 8.3 million, or let's say 10 million, and then have the bonding company be on the hook for the rest. I don't know what bonding company, knowing that Donald Trump is committed persistent fraud in the state of New York as a judge by a judge, is going to do a bond for him, or he's going to have to come up with the 83 and change plus another set of interest, probably closer to 100 million, and put it into the court registry in order to stop the enforcement of that while he takes it what will ultimately be a losing appeal to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals on his way to the Supreme Court again on whether he had absolute immunity. Alina Habba, you did a great job on your hot takes, and we'll talk about it more here. It just is this constant harangue that she used, that she intoned and berated the jury with about First Amendment and blame the rape victim, and the blame the rape victim had it coming, in other words, and the rape victim is profiting from this, and you shouldn't give her more money. She's made so much money because she was raped by my client. I mean, this is just mind-boggling bad. And the jury, which, as I started my analysis here, juries hate being lied to, being found that you're inauthentic and that you're talking down to them and patronizing them. And I assure you, having worked with juries for years, this jury despised Alina Habba, despised the muttering, unhinged ramblings of Donald Trump. Alina Habba was shot down by the judge in front of the jury half a dozen times for doing things that were inappropriate, including being warned that she was teetering on the edge of sanctions and contempt. Juries follow the leader being the judge wearing a black robe. They look for direction from that person. That's their boss, if you will, while they're sitting there doing their civic duty. I'm sure they had a lot of respect for Judge Kaplan. And when a judge looks at a lawyer and says, "You're effing up in my courtroom," juries take notice. And when you're trying to calculate punitive damages, as you said, Ben, that defendant should be like a halo. They should be wearing like their best clothes and look prim and proper and just shut the F up in court unless you're testifying at that moment. But that's not Donald Trump's approach. He already had an example of what not to do with Rudy Giuliani and what a jury could do in response. But that didn't stop him. So he took a $5 million judgment from the summer, and he, by his own misconduct and his lawyer's misconduct, turned that into an $83 million judgment with a brand new jury in New York. One last comment, Ben. Merrick Garland should get credit also here for what he finally did in terms of taking the position ultimately that there was no presidential immunity that would allow the United States to intervene in the case, to take Donald Trump out, and therefore seek the case's dismissal. There was a period for about a year we were wondering what Merrick Garland was going to do with the E. Jean Carroll case. If he had stepped in and said, well, that looks like it's inside of presidential immunity and his scope of authority to have made those comments while he was president of the United States, so for future precedent, we're going to step in, that would have killed this case in its tracks and set a terrible precedent that the D.C. Court of Appeals and Supreme Court are dealing with now about immunity for civil and criminal acts of Donald Trump. So shout out to Merrick Garland. We would not be talking about an $83 million judgment for E. Jean Carroll if he had asserted, if you will, presidential immunity and taken Donald Trump out of this case.
You know, it's a hyper-technical immunity issue, which we could write hyper-technical textbooks about it. Suffice to say, there's a statute called the Westfall Act where the Department of Justice can assert that underlying conduct falls within the course and scope of presidential duties and therefore substitute in the United States as a defendant or party in the case in place of the government official. Bill Barr tried to do that. As the facts developed, Merrick Garland ultimately decided not to do that. But because Alina Habba was so incompetent, she could have, independent of that process, asserted absolute presidential immunity as an affirmative defense, independent of what the attorney general would do or not do, to still be able to try to make that argument. She failed to basically check the box and put that sentence in the answer, which you would literally just say, Donald Trump hereby asserts absolute presidential immunity. So when that issue more recently went before the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, they laughed Alina Habba out of court and said, yeah, you're about 3 years too late for this. And also in Alina Habba's press conference that she had after the trial concluded, where she was whining about things like, the judge wouldn't let my experts in, the judge wouldn't allow the dress to come in, the judge wouldn't all the blah, blah, blah. The reality is that Alina Habba waived all of those things. She, based on her bad lawyering or Donald Trump's decisions, they never turned over the DNA on time, which they could have done, and they could have made that an issue. It would have related to the first trial, not this trial, but they never turned that over on time. She waived the experts. She didn't file the declarations on time. She didn't designate appropriate experts. It was disqualified because she just didn't follow the most basic fundamental rules of civil procedure. And it was clear when she was in trial that she's just a very incompetent person, and Trump surrounds himself with incompetent yes people like Alina Habba. And afterwards, she posted something like, let's go MAGA. This is not the end of this. We're just getting started. Like, just getting started with what? Losing more? I could only hope that she takes a more robust role on all things Donald Trump. Final thing I want to mention, federal judge Lewis Kaplan gave a warning to jurors. He's treated this case like a mob boss case, like a mafia case, as though you had El Chapo in front of him. He said, I'm going to give you a warning. You can do what you want to do here, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, but I would suggest strongly you tell nobody ever that you served on this jury, because you could be in danger. So do not tell anybody. And the way he conducted his court, federal judge Lewis Kaplan, was that of a mafia trial. So Popok, to your point, Donald Trump will now have to post a bond. E Jean Carroll, unless Donald Trump doesn't post a bond, if he doesn't post the bond, E Jean Carroll can start collections right away. If Trump posts the bond, it stays the collections pending the appeal. Trump will inevitably lose the appeal. That may take a year to kind of work its way through the courts. But in terms of when I would expect E Jean Carroll to be paid as it goes through the appeal process on both cases, I mean, you're probably talking about in 12 to 18 months to about 2 years, she'll get paid. But Trump is going to have to pay that money. He's not going to be, he's not going to be able to wiggle out of this one. I think you and I both agree.
Well, if you like podcasts that are run by lawyers who know what they're talking about, then you'll love Legal AF. We sit at that intersection of law, politics, and justice so that you don't have to. And twice a week, one place, the 2 million subscriber MeidasTouch network. We do our job on a podcast we like to call Legal AF, and the title means exactly what you think. And then you can pick us up on audio podcast platforms wherever you get those from. If you know all about Legal AF and you enjoy it, appreciate you, and thank you for being along as part of your journey on ours. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, that's an example of what we do on Legal AF. We do that in an hour-long podcast. Take it, listen to it, join us on Wednesdays and Saturdays, and on audio podcast platforms. So until my next hot take, until my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.